In today's video, I'll show you how I painted this ULTRON miniature for the Marvel Crisis Protocol game made by Atomic Mass Games by using a mixture of overbrushing and dry brushing metals, as well as a couple of little secret weapons that I had in my painting arsenal. Hello everyone, my name is Torben and welcome to Miniatorium, a hobby channel with tips, tricks, reviews and tutorials for the average miniature hobbyist who's looking for easy recipes for getting their models painted and on the table. And for this tutorial I'll go over a bit of various techniques that I use, such as overbrushing and dry brushing, to really bring out the metallic colors across ULTRON's body, and tell you about a little secret weapon that I use to get the shiny red power panels as well. However, as ULTRON is somewhat simple to paint, as he's primarily made of metal within and without, I figured that I'd sneak in a bit of an initial impression / review of the new metallic color paint set from the Army Painter. So a bit 2-for-1 video, all for the low price of free of course, although wouldn't mind if you gave a little like and subscribe. Now at first I was a bit hesitant to get the metallic color set, as I had a hard time envisioning when I would ever use most of the included colors, but after some hmming and ahhing, I ended up getting it for 2 reasons. 1. Shiny, retail, therapy. 2. There were some colors included in the set that I had a big interest in, such as night scales, a nice bluish metal that would work wonders for more of a cast iron look, and evil chrome because I needed a more saturated coppery color and it seemed to fit the bill. But most importantly, I wanted to get a hold of the tainted gold, as I really loved the greenish tint to this golden color, a rarity for most of my usual suspects among the paint brands that I tend to use. Whilst the rest of the set has some perfectly fine colors with a nice opacity and seem to mix well, they're also highly specialized and not really something I can see go into my everyday use, but there was a standout surprise included: fairy dust. Now this is a new effect paint which on its own is more of a pearlescent color, but its real strength lies in being a perfect, almost neutral highlight mixing color for all of the other Army Painter metallics. And as you'll see later on in this painting guide, I never knew how much I needed this color in my paint arsenal before I got it. So with this small review out of the way, which will become more detailed in the future as I get around to using all of these colors, I think it's time to get down to the painting desk and get some paint on ULTRON. First I primed him with Vallejo black primer using my airbrush, and then gave the base, and only the base, a quick zenithal highlight of Vallejo gray primer. The reason that I didn't give his body the same zenithal is because metallics tend to lose a bit of their sheen when they are painted over a brighter undercoat, and I wanted ULTRON to be really shiny. You can easily replace this by just giving him a normal black primer coat instead. So now I start out the paint job with a good covering of night scales from the new colored metallic set, in order to give a nice and dark bluish tone to work up from, and to further help in establishing the sheen that I envision. Using a nice and even thin coat, I then proceed to cover the whole of ULTRON's body with this color, making sure to get it into all of the nooks and crannies, whilst also being mindful that I don't end up obscuring all of the finer details on the model. Next, I add a good helping of shining silver to my wet palette, and then work in a small amount of shining silver to the night scales to make a midway tone, roughly 1 part of night scale mixed with 2 parts of shining silver. I then proceed to overbrush this color all over the model, taking care not to get into all of the recesses, but without being overly neat either. This coat is intended as the true base coat that I want to work up from, with the night scale color only there to help in the deepest recesses. Unlike a regular dry brushing method, where you want to remove as much moisture from your brush as possible, you need to have some moisture left on the paint on the brush when doing an overbrush. This is to prevent the paint from looking too chalky, and also to speed up the process a bit. With a good coating of this mixture all over the body, I then proceed, without cleaning my brush, to add progressive layers of shining silver all over the body, trying to keep it focused more and more towards the top of the model. This time around, however, in order to keep the recesses as dark as possible, I switch to a dry brushing method instead, and take care not to oversaturate any given area with too much color at once, and keep adding progressive layers of this color until I'm satisfied. When dry brushing, it is always better to add subtler progressive layers instead of a large covering layer, something that I tend to forget as well from time to time, as I get a bit too eager for a final result when I'm dry brushing. As a final touch, I then start adding a bit of fairy dust, my new wonder paint, to the shining silver to really boost the brightness of the silver color all over the body of ULTRON, giving it an almost chrome-like finish, which is quite perfect for the bold and cartoony take I'm looking for with this paint job. However, because I have added all of these layers of overbrushing and dry brushing colors, some of the contrast and shadows have been lost in the process, which I now want to correct by taking a 50-50 mixture of water and dark tone and then proceed to shade in the recesses. This can be a delicate process, but I find that it is easier to do rather than giving the whole of the model a wash and then have to build up the colors once again. That and most washes tend to dull down the sheen, which I wasn't too keen on. So I grab a small synthetic brush with a fine point and some long bristles, filled it up and carry on adding this watered down mixture to all of the panel lines that I could find. And be warned, there is a lot on this miniature, so this will take some time. Should you end up splotching the wash over to the metallic area, it is easily corrected once it's dry by simply taking a bit of the previous shining silver and fairy dust mixture we had from before and then cover up the mistakes. At this point, I feel that I want to push the highlights even further to boost the contrast from the recesses that I just painted, so I add a bit more fairy dust to my shining silver mixture and then carefully highlighted some select panels on the body. For this, I chose to only focus on a few select focal points where your eye would be naturally drawn to, such as the chest, the shoulders, the top of the legs, and of course the head. But I still needed a bit more oomph to the metallic, so I busted out a bit of scale 75 speed metal and gave a small, fine highlight along the various raised edges, almost as if I edge highlighted these areas. And this process was repeated, adding some recess shading and then pushing highlights across the model until I was satisfied, but you can easily stop at any point during this process once you're happy with the overall shine of the bodywork. At this stage, after having finished all of the metallic colors for ULTRON's body, it's time for the second stage of the paint job, the glowing red panels. For these, I start out by first mixing in a bit of fairy dust with some bright gold in a roughly 50-50 mix to get a nice bright and golden brassy metallic color. The reason being that I need a bit of a golden hue for the next step as well as something really bright. All of the larger panels will then get a good helping of this color, as well as the eyes and other larger parts where I thought the reddish orange power glow would give a nice contrast to the overall metallic body. Don't worry about cleaning up any parts that you miss at this stage, as we're only prepping for the next step at this point, and there's going to be some cleanup later on as well. Now once the larger panels were painted, it was time that I pulled out my secret weapon from the arsenal, Angron Clear Red from Games Workshop's line of air paints, and then I proceed to paint in all of the larger panels using this color. And even though it says air, it can easily be used with a regular brush, as you can see here, provided that you think of it more as a wash or shade rather than a normal layer paint. Now this is a wonderful red-orange color that works almost like a contrast color with one big exception. It's glossy, and I thought that this would be the perfect companion color for a quick and easy scheme in painting ULTRON. The reason for painting in all of the gold earlier, before using this clear red, was to further push it into an orange hue for the larger areas, because if applied directly over the bluish metallics, we would change the hue to a more purplish color, which wasn't what I was looking for here. For the deeper recesses and smaller panel lines, however, I didn't add this golden color, as the lines were simply so small that any color change gain would be non-existent. So instead I simply added the clear red directly to all of these panel lines and gave it 2 coats where necessary. And after having added this color to all of the panel lines, taking care to only use a sparing amount for the very small panel lines, and being very mindful of my brush control, I then check all over the model to find any splotches and corrected them using either my shining silver mixture from before or the speed metal color where necessary. To really frame the miniature and make him stand out on the tabletop, I now turn my attention to painting the base by giving it a good covering of dark stone as a base coat for the concrete and urban area that is present on the pre-made base. For this layer, I really get into all of the corners and crevices of the base, as I will need a really dark color for the next step when I start to add further colors. To get a good coverage, I went all over it with a couple of thin coats and took care not to hit his feet on the ever-present tactical rock that he's standing on. From there, I mixed in a small amount of dark stone into some dungeon gray and proceed to dry brush up the layers, making sure not to hit too many of the recesses in order to leave the raw dark stone showing in the deepest part. I keep going at it, slowly adding more and more dry brushing layers of the dungeon gray until I'm happy with the overall look, and then boost the contrast by giving it an overall wash with dark tone, to which I added a bit of water, not only to thin it out a bit, but also to prevent it from toning the overall colors too much. Once this wash was fully dry, and after about half an hour or so, I then gave it another dry brushing of dungeon gray, taking further care not to overload my brush and use more of a stippling motion on the larger flat areas of the base. To finish off the effect, I took a bit of ash gray and made sure to dry brush a light dusting all over the sharpest edges on the base with this color as a final highlighting layer, which helps to tie all of it together and also aids in giving a bit more contrast to the base, making it stand out more on the tabletop. And finally, it's time to celebrate another painted miniature by taking a victory lap around the base rim with matte black. There we go. Ultimate evil machine with a slight case of daddy issues is now ready to take to the field and battle it out with other heroes and villains in my future games of Marvel Crisis Protocol. Whilst the paint scheme itself is relatively simple, the main challenge when painting this miniature, for me at the very least, was all of the panel lines on the model, especially since I botched my assembling of this model a bit and had a lot of plastic glue spilled over into these finer details and obscuring them. But other than that, it was a nice model to paint whilst testing out some new colors, of which the standouts were definitely the fairy dust effect from the Army Painter range, as well as the Angron clear red paint from Citadel, both of which I haven't seen being used very often on the internet. Especially the Angron clear red, which really made it easy to paint all of the red panels, but then again I'm not quite sure what else I'm going to use this color for in the future, whilst the fairy dust is more than likely to go into heavy rotation for my usual paints, for whenever I need to push the highlights of my other metallics. Now, one thing that I might have done a bit different, which I of course only thought after the fact, was to use Nuln Oil gloss to get an even easier recess shading on the model, but I've not had that much success in using it because if it pools, it will leave a very glossy shadow, which I don't usually care for, but in this particular case, it might actually have been a good addition to the recipe. But that is for another video. For now, I'd like to thank you for watching this one, and I hope that there were some tricks or ideas that you could use for your own future projects, or maybe even to paint your very own ULTRON, quick, easy, and battle ready for your own games. Now, if you have any questions or feedback, suggestions for things that you'd like to see here on the channel in the future, or just to share your own painted work, then be sure to leave a comment below. And with that, I hope we'll meet at the painting desk again next week.